ole, champions. Chelsea are kings of Europe twice. 2 stars on the shirt. What an amazing achievement. I am elated, over the moon, can barely contain myself. I tell you who throws a good Champions League party. That's Mr. True Geordie. I'm feeling slightly fragile and therefore will be nursing a nice cup of matcha latte to get me through it. But this video is going to be a video where we salute and hail the great disruptors. The great disruptors are, of course, Chelsea Football Club. What we have managed to achieve in 2 European Cups, where we have completely upset the odds, beaten the favourites in both finals, is something to be admired and, in my case, totally adored. You think about what we did in Munich, we broke Bayern Munich hearts in their stadium, and this, against Man City, we robbed them from what was effectively, it was positioned at least, as being their destiny. Pep Guardiola, everything about him, everything about Sheikh Mansour, the club was on the path. The trajectory was the European Cup. Chelsea didn't read the script. And we actually tore it up out there. We were phenomenal. And the Estadio do Dragão will now be forever in our hearts, etched and perfectly aligned with Chelsea Football Club, as is the Allianz in Munich. I want to talk about the heroes of the night. I think there are some obvious ones. Obviously, Thomas Tuchel beating Pep Guardiola for the 3rd time in 6 weeks. Outrageous, incredible achievement. The way that he positioned his team, the way that we set up perfectly for counterattacks. It was a devastating approach to the game, and one that intimidated and ultimately defeated Pep Guardiola. Another hero, naturally, N'Golo Kante, a man who is everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. I cannot believe that Pep Guardiola didn't try and combat the brilliance of N'Golo Kante, because it can't be a surprise to anyone quite how good he is. He's an outrageous player who has now won everything. I think if there were any detractors from the brilliance of N'Golo Kante, they would have suggested that perhaps he hadn't won a European Cup. And could you compare him to the greats in that position, the greats of central midfield, when you haven't won a European Cup? Now, there is no answer to that. World Cup, Premier League, Europa League, Champions League. The man is a great. The man now needs to be compared to the immortals. He is comparable now to the Claude Makélélés of this world, the Patrick Vieiras, the Roy Keanes. That is who N'Golo Kante is. But, again, no surprise that he was such a hero. I mean, you knew this was coming, right? But I'm obviously going to talk about Mason Mount, the craft, the mentality. I mean, he is, for me, the golden player of this young England generation. I know people like to always be a little bit more hipster and tell me that it's Jack Grealish, but I do honestly think it's Mason Mount. I don't think there's a flaw to his game. And the pass was exquisite. It was Cesc Fabregas-like. It really was. It was Fabregas and Schneider rolled into one, all coming out in a Chelsea shirt in the form of Mason Mount. And just to think of what he has achieved in such a young age. I remember him playing for Vitesse. I remember that as if it were yesterday. And it wasn't that long ago. He has been just a revelation, and we are so lucky to have him. Then there's the honourable mentions, right? Antonio Rudiger. Brave, tenacious, physical, demanding of himself and others around him. Intimidating as well for the Manchester City players. He was a real presence and a real force. Edouard Mendy wouldn't give anything, and Cesar Azpilicueta, as you would expect, fighting for every single decision and ball. But there was also a surprise hero, I thought. Not necessarily because he doesn't have the skill, not necessarily because we didn't know that he was a fantastic player, but I don't think anybody would have assumed that Kai Havertz, when we signed him at the beginning of this season, when you think about how he played earlier on in the season, of course there were reasons for that, but Kai Havertz has now got his name etched into the Chelsea folklore, into the Chelsea history books forever. Kai Havertz's name will be a familiar one to my great-grandchildren. It's an amazing thing. I mean, obviously, the form over the season has been fairly patchy, but he chose the ideal stage to demonstrate why we spent 70-odd million pounds on him. It was a brilliant performance. Remember, it was a brilliant goal. It was full of everything that you want in a football player, because it was full of grit and aggression and determination, but it was also full of silk and guile and craft and finesse. I mean, I just think that the world is this guy's oyster. Just think, where does he go? Is it Ballon d'Or? Do we need to be talking about Kai Havertz as having it all and potentially winning a Ballon d'Or whilst at Chelsea? And thus, we must discuss Pep Guardiola's role in all this, because I think Pep Guardiola has handed this to Chelsea. Chelsea snatched it. Chelsea certainly carped the diem, but Pep Guardiola made it available to Chelsea. Pep Guardiola did what Pep Guardiola has a tendency to do, and that is overthink. And he did that because of what Thomas Tuchel had achieved in the 2 previous encounters within the last month or so. He has lost only his 2nd final out of the 16 that he's contested as manager. Interestingly, the one thing that he promised was not to overthink it, and that is exactly what he did. But due to the intensity that Chelsea have played with against Manchester City, Chelsea ended the talk of the quadruple for Manchester City. Guardiola decided to overthink it, and he did it in a sort of crackpot way, a way that was so wild that even the layman of the game, you and I, we couldn't understand it. It was such an obvious thing not to do. To play Gundogan, the guy who is Manchester City's top goal scorer, as a holding midfielder, when you have the brilliance of Fernandinho on the bench. Fernandinho is one of the best who have ever played the game in that position. Fernandinho was incredible for Manchester City in getting to this stage. He was man of the match in the League Cup final against Tottenham. He is a man for the big stage, a monster in that role. And I truly believe that with him on the pitch, that ball isn't played through as easily as it was by Mason Mount. So there we have it. Chelsea have won the European Cup. Chelsea are champions and kings of Europe. Chelsea will be competing in the World Club Tournament, a tournament I visited in 2012. I went to Japan, to Tokyo, to watch Chelsea lose, sadly, to Corinthians. But I will certainly be going to that again. It was immense, and I can't believe that we have the opportunity to do it again. But I would like to finish this video with a question for you. Anybody who's watched any of my content over the years will know that I always say and concede that Arsenal are the biggest club in London. However, I think that a conversation now is at least in need. I think when you look at what Chelsea have achieved over the past, say, 2 decades, over the past 20 years, Chelsea have won 5 Premier Leagues, 2 Champions Leagues, 2 Europa Leagues, 5 FA Cups, and 3 League Cups. That is 17 trophies. 17 moments of glorious silverware. I think that perhaps a slight reshift when you look at what's going on at Arsenal, when you look at where they finished in the league, when you think that they were tussling with Leeds United as to who was going to finish in the top half of the table, when you think that they haven't won a Premier League for 2 decades. I now wonder if 2 European Cups for Chelsea, which is more than the rest of London combined, now at least makes it a conversation. So do me a favour, comment below, let me know. Are Chelsea now the biggest club in London? And I'm not doing this from a tribal point of view. I do hope that everybody watching will remember that I've always said, up until today, that it was Arsenal. But what started with the brilliant Wayne Bridge at Highbury may have been ended by Kai Havertz in the Estadio de Dragao. Bang. Oh, let's celebrate. Champagne, anyone? Too early?